All right, welcome everyone to our briefing today about the 2025 Sustainable Energy in America Factbook. I'm Dan Brissett. I'm the president of the Environmental and Energy Study Institute. Are we? Brendan, is it okay? Is it? Okay.
Let me mute this computer just in case. Sorry.
You're going to need to unmute it with the video. Okay, great. How's that? Is that a little bit better? Oh, good. The thumbs up. All right, well, let me start again just in case. Welcome to our briefing today about the 2025 Sustainable Energy in America Factbook. I'm Dan Brissett. I'm the president of the Environmental and Energy Study Institute. And I'd like to start with thanking Representative Paul Tonko and his great staff for helping us with the room today. I'd also like to say special thanks to the Renewable Energy and Energy Efficiency Caucuses of the Senate and the House. In the Senate, it's chaired and co-chaired by Senators Crapo, Reed, Collins, and Van Hollen. And over here on the House side, Representative Emmanuel Cleaver is our co-chair. And I'd also like to say thanks to the Sustainable Energy and Environment Coalition for being honorary co-sponsors as well and working with us to bring you this briefing and helping get the word out about sustainable energy in the United States in 2025. I actually was going to have a little April Fool's joke there. I was encouraged to do so, but I'm going to skip that since I've already screwed up the microphone once and move on. Sorry, Lizzie. Sorry, Emmy. This briefing would not be possible without the partnership of the Business Council for Sustainable Energy, so special thanks to Lisa and her great team, Laura, Lizzie, and Emmy, and Ruth, who I haven't seen yet today, but Ruth is always great too. Thanks to her team and her members, company members of the Business Council, as well as the good folks at BloombergNEF, who have once again put together a really, really great resource. For more than 40 years, EESI has brought nonpartisan, science-based information to Capitol Hill. We were founded by a bipartisan group of members of Congress, and since 1984, we have worked to provide science-based information about environmental, energy, and climate change topics to policymakers as well as the public. And our work has always focused on the multiple benefits of these solutions, like energy affordability and better economic outcomes, enhanced grid resilience and readiness, and improved national security, and international competitiveness for U.S. companies. What does congressional education look like? Well, at EESI, it looks like this. Lots and lots of congressional briefings, public, live cast. Some of them are online only, but we do a lot of briefings, almost 24 a year on all sorts of different topics. And if you're new to EESI, a great way to get to know what we do is by checking out our 4-part briefing series from earlier this year called Congressional Climate Camp. And that covered topics like the budget and appropriations processes, surface transportation reauthorization, climate modeling and the impacts of climate solutions, and of course, jobs, jobs, jobs. Everything is always available at www.eesi.org. And the best way to keep up with what we do is to subscribe to our bi-weekly newsletter, Climate Change Solutions. We work really hard to make sure that these briefings are timely, relevant, accessible, and practical. Put a lot of thought into that. It's always better for a congressional staff person to have the information before your boss asks the tough question or you have to answer constituent mail. And you can count on us to help with that. For example, coming up in our next few briefings are going to deal primarily with surface transportation. There's a big hearing in EPW tomorrow on the Senate side to kick off that process. And so we'll be covering that very closely. And that will continue over the course of the next several months. But each year we're here to highlight the Factbook because it's a tremendously valuable resource. It's available online. There might be some printouts, but it's a really, really great resource. It's thoughtfully organized and it's just absolutely chock full of data points and trends that will help you make sense of how the U.S. energy system is evolving, what the drivers of that evolution are, and what policy options could encourage to evolve further. If you have thoughts about our briefing today, I'll put this QR code up. It's a survey. It takes about 2 minutes or so. There's a couple new questions, so if you've sat out the survey for the last few briefings or if you're new to us, we'd really appreciate your responses. We read every response. If you have any comments about the programming, we'd love to hear it. I'm going to introduce Lisa Jacobson in just a moment, but we have some tremendous panelists. Lisa will handle them. And after our presentations, we'll have some time for questions and answers. Of course, questions from in the room, but if you are in our online audience, and many of you are, you can follow us on social media at EESI Online, ask us questions that way. You can also send us an email, and the email address to use with your questions is ask, that's ASK, at eesi.org, and we'll do our best to incorporate those questions into the discussion once we get to that. So without any further ado, I'd like to introduce Lisa Jacobson. Lisa is the president of the Business Council for Sustainable Energy, a 65-member trade association representing the energy efficiency, natural gas, and renewable energy industries. Lisa has 20 years of experience advising federal and state policymakers on energy, tax, air quality, and climate change issues. She's a member of the U.S. Trade Representatives Trade and Environment Policy Advisory Committee, the Energy Efficiency Global Alliance Steering Committee, and the Gas Technology Institute's Public Interest Advisory Committee. Lisa, thanks once again for working with us on this briefing, and I'll turn it over to you.
Well, thank you so much, Dan, and thank you to the EESI team and the Business Council for Sustainable Energy team for working collaboratively for at least a decade on putting the Sustainable Energy in America Factbook briefing on for all of you. And when I think, Dan was reading my bio, and I'm reminded of my age, but feeling good around these halls because I started my career in DC as a House staffer. So I understand when he says, what do you do when you get that tough question? And EESI, obviously for the energy sector, but for so many other topic areas, is really a priceless resource. And I know one that I would have benefited from, and so appreciate all the free information that you have and your continued education here in Congress. So today, I'm just going to do a couple of opening remarks to tell you a little bit about the Business Council for Sustainable Energy and the partnership that we have with BloombergNEF on the 2025 Sustainable Energy in America Factbook. And with that, I'd say all this information is available for free off of the Business Council for Sustainable Energy's website, so www.bcse.org. There are cards with QR codes that will take you right to all the information, and we're always happy to help at a staff level if you have questions or interested in the data. We often get requests from members who would like to use a particular chart in their talking points or in a presentation they're giving at home, town hall meetings, so just let us know. We would love to help you. And our Vice President of Federal and State Affairs is Ruth McCormick, and many of you may have received emails or have met with her and our members recently, so thank you for that. The Business Council for Sustainable Energy, and actually one of my homework assignments I've already failed at, so let me put up my name card here so you don't forget who I am. Hold on. Okay, let's see. Will it stay? Hopefully. It's not too, there we go. I think that's good enough. So let me tell you a little bit about the Business Council. The Business Council for Sustainable Energy is a coalition of companies and trade associations from the energy efficiency, natural gas, and renewable energy sectors. Our members also focus on many decarbonization technologies as well as sustainable transportation, energy storage, hydrogen, the list goes on. And I would say when you look at our membership as a whole, we represent really this portfolio that has been dominating our energy growth over the last 2 decades, and you'll see some of that reflected in the data. Over 13 years ago, the Business Council and BloombergNEF partnered on the first Sustainable Energy in America Factbook. We did that because we knew the sector was changing, but we didn't have a resource that looked at the energy systems in the U.S. holistically. And importantly, that also looked at demand-side solutions. There's a lot of attention on the supply side, but we need to be looking at our energy sector holistically and fully taking advantage of demand-side actions. So this resource does that. We chronicle change, we set baselines, and we come together every year to do kind of a respective report card on where we are. And you're going to hear from one of the lead analysts in a few moments from BloombergNEF describing that. But before I turn it over to him, I would just like to say a couple things about really what has changed in the last couple of years. The conversation on energy has changed. We are now looking at a period of expansive growth in U.S. energy supply and as well as demand. This is coming from many important factors. It's coming from reshoring of manufacturing, increased needs for industrial processes. We will talk a lot about AI and data centers, and importantly, corporate demand. So when you think about what's going on in the energy sector, know that we are at a new moment, and a moment that will help U.S. competitiveness, a moment that will help bring jobs and economic prosperity to communities, and one where we can maintain our innovative cutting edge globally. All this is extremely important and very exciting. So When I look at Congress and what Business Council for Sustainable Energy members hope will occur this year, we hope, number one, that we will maintain the bipartisan support that we have had for decades for the full suite of energy tax credits. This is critical. This is the market signal. And as I was just at an event earlier today on hydrogen, the industry said loud and clear, this is key to our competitiveness. This will enable us to invest. So we need those tax credits maintained. We also need to speed our permitting processes. We need to build. We need more energy now. Every molecule, every electron. And right now, it just takes way too long. Congress has a role to play there. And then finally, budget and appropriations. What we do at the federal agencies to spark public-private partnership, to support basic research and development, to help getting technology out of the lab and into the market and benefiting communities, that matters. And so we're starting the appropriations season for fiscal year 2026. So Business Council for Sustainable Energy members would love to talk to you about those priorities. So with that, we're going to show a short video and then turn it over to BloombergNEF for the opening presentation. Thanks so much.
The United States is on the cusp of a new era of energy expansion. Over the past 15 years, electricity demand has been relatively steady. Now, growth in industry and transportation, the onshoring of American manufacturing, and a burst of new data centers planned by technology companies are contributing to rapidly rising expectations of power demand. The good news? American sustainable energy technologies are ready to meet this increasing energy demand. The 2025 Sustainable Energy in America Factbook chronicles how these energy sectors performed in 2024 and highlights the critical role sustainable energy technologies play in building a competitive U.S. economy. Energy productivity, the U.S. economy, and energy demand all grew in 2024. U.S. energy productivity grew by 2.3% as the economy expanded 2.8%, while primary energy consumption grew 0.5% year-on-year. At the same time, corporate procurement of renewable energy set a record in 2024, contracting 28 gigawatts, up 34% from 20.9 gigawatts in 2022. BCSE's diversified, sustainable energy portfolio of energy efficiency, natural gas, and renewable energy is ready to meet this increasing demand. In 2024, U.S. power generation reached its highest volume in 2 decades, driven by record growth in renewable energy technologies and by stable natural gas generation capacity. By deploying these homegrown sustainable energy solutions, the United States is building a competitive and secure national economy. In 2024, $8 billion was invested across supply chain segments for the hydrogen electrolyzer, wind, solar, and battery sectors. Jobs in sustainable energy grew 4.2% in 2023, more than twice the rate of the overall economy. In 2024, global investment in sustainable energy once again set a record, soaring to over $2 trillion. The United States had its own record-breaking year, deploying $338 billion toward energy transition technologies, while China remained in the lead with $818 billion of investment. Continued U.S. commitment to clean tech finance, innovation, and deployment is needed to close that gap with China and strengthen U.S. competitiveness. Find out more about the record year of energy growth in 2024. Download the Sustainable Energy in America Factbook today.
It's my pleasure to introduce to you Derrick Flakoll, Senior Policy Associate for North America with BloombergNEF, and also a primary contributor and editor to the 2025 Sustainable Energy in America Factbook. Derrick, the floor is yours.
Well, thank you everyone for this opportunity to come speak to you today. I live in DC, but it's still always a pleasant surprise when I'm able to make my way up to the Hill. I'm Derrick Flakoll. I'm BNEF's Senior Policy Associate for North America, meaning I cover any kind of policy emanating out of DC or Ottawa that affects energy writ large, including electric vehicles, commodities like oil, gas, critical minerals, and of course power markets. So I know a little bit about a lot of things, and I'm happy to kind of guide you on this quick tour through the Business Council on Sustainable Energy. If you have sort of further, more in-depth questions, you can reach out to me or my colleagues at BNEF. We'll be happy to speak to you about it. But you can think of the BCSE as a bit of a report card and a check-in on the state of America's energy system. Cool. And so we're going to sort of start with a sort of diagnostic, a gut check, showing where we are, and we're going to talk about what's going well, what could change, what could improve a bit, and things that are sort of changing, they're maybe a gray flag rather than a red or a green flag, just things that are important to note, even if they're not clearly good or bad. So 2024 at a glance, the sort of starting point of this fact book, which is backward looking, gives you a clear sense of where the U.S. is at the moment. This year, as in most years, we have seen the U.S.'s GDP increase, even if its primary energy consumption remains roughly flat. In other words, we've increased the productivity of our economy in energy terms. For each unit of energy, we're able to get more GDP growth out of that energy. And if you look at the chart on the right, you can see that this reflects a changing but abundant primary energy mix. Now, this includes all forms of energy for transportation, power generation, building and industrial heating, and so forth. And you can really see that that's dominated by two key sources. America's abundant natural gas and petroleum energy are the sort of foundation of America's primary energy production if you look across all sectors. Within that, of course, you can see that nuclear is a steady and important contributor. Renewables, including hydropower, continue to grow, and coal has been sliding since 2010 quite dramatically, with that primarily going towards electricity generation. But as mentioned, this is an overview of the entire energy sector in the US. If you were to drill down across the sort of major end uses of energy, you can see that there's dramatically different trends across sectors. The power sector, in red at the top on the left, still represents the majority of primary energy consumption in the US, but that consumption has been drifting down in part because of the growing contribution of renewables, among other energy sources, to the electricity generation sector. A little bit of physics. If you're burning coal or fossil fuels, a lot of that energy becomes useful. Some of it is waste heat. That's just thermodynamics for you. So mechanically, as you get a little bit more renewables in there, the primary energy consumption of power goes down. Transportation, we've seen, is lower than pre-2020, but still sort of flat, more or less, since 2000. And below that, we see that industrial is the sort of third sector, also a little bit flat in primary terms. Down at the bottom, you can see residential and commercial, which is basically non-electricity building energy use, natural gas for heating, things like that. Zooming in on the power sector, which, as we know, is the main driver of energy consumption in the US, we can take a look at the demand side and see three separate things. First of all, in the blue, you can see that electricity demand has been going up since 2000, but at a fairly manageable pace. If you look in the solid black line, you can see the annual growth rate each year of electricity, and you'll see it's very uneven, peaks and valleys. There are years when electricity grows, and there's years where it grows quickly, grows slowly, there's years where it declines. What the average of that, the compound annual growth rate since 1990 shows, is that the actual growth rate in electricity demand has been drifting downward. It's been at about 1% in 2024. And that has a few resonances, right? Of course, around the dot-com boom, with growth in data centers and cloud infrastructure, there was an expectation that electricity demand might spike. We haven't actually seen that yet. At the same time, the new demands of hyperscale data centers and AI call into question whether that pattern will repeat itself in coming years. But this is where we are now. We haven't seen a huge spike in demand, at least nationally, from data centers yet. And that's what we're all looking to see in the future, whether that will materialize, and if so, where. And the where question is very important because the U.S.'s energy system, and its electricity system in particular, is highly regionalized. For those who aren't necessarily familiar with those acronyms like MISO, PJM, SPP, these are some of the ISOs or RTOs. These are the big regional electricity distribution management organizations. ERCOT is Texas, California is CAISO. And you can see that there are very different power profiles and growth profiles across the entire country. Nuclear is a key contributor in MISO, PJM, and the Southeast. And in some places, we see more reliance on renewables, more reliance on gas. And we see, again, different growth profiles with ERCOT, or Texas, notably growing the fastest out of all of these different markets, and others drifting down or staying relatively flat. Broadly speaking, from a financial perspective, this reflects a lot of money going into new energy sectors beyond the traditional coal, oil, and gas. If you add up all of these sectors, including transportation, zero carbon energy, electrified heat, and so forth, you'll see that the US is the second largest country by investment, although notably far behind China, despite being second to China, even in 2024. And secondly, if you look at the sort of year-on-year trends, we see a record, but a fairly flat record. In other words, US investment in the energy transition sectors was only about $2 billion, if I recall correctly, higher than in the year 2023, and with a notable change in composition. You can see that investment in clean energy, which is to say solar, wind, and so forth, actually declined somewhat. And a lot of the reason for that increase in investment is because we count power grids in blue at the top. Now, power grids are critical for energy transition sectors, right? They could enable decarbonization, but there's a lot more that we want out of those. We want resilience. We need to engage in maintenance just to keep distribution and transmission lines working. And so I think there's a somewhat ambiguous picture here from a pure financial perspective about whether the energy transition, in the sense of zero carbon energy sources, is, the pace at which it's moving. I'll also make one additional note. This is a record of capital expenditure when it comes to big projects like energy storage, renewables, or industrial facilities, and consumer spending when it comes to sectors like electrified transport or electrified heat. It should be noted that if you get capital expenditures going down because, say, price is lower, then that can show up in here as a somewhat lower investment, which, doesn't necessarily equal the amount of power capacity that's actually coming onto the grid. How that feeds through into power prices presents an interesting and variable picture. And it's important here to distinguish between the wholesale and the retail side of the equation. As a quick reminder, you know that traditionally in the US, power is run through monopolies, from generation through distribution and transmission to the consumer's point of sale. In a lot of markets, those factors have been unbundled so that you have wholesale before you get to the consumer end, and then retail at the consumer end. So you can see that the US has had relatively lower wholesale power prices and highly variable across different regions. Texas, of course, saw massive spikes around Winter Storm Uri in 2021, 2022. The rest of the US saw more spikes after the Russian invasion of Ukraine, drawing up gas prices and therefore gas generation costs. But things have been trending downward in many markets in 2024, maybe a slight increase in some places like New York. But at the retail end, the thing that consumers actually pay, you see a wide dispersion of trends. In general, since 2010, in most markets besides California and New England, electricity prices for consumers have gone down. Of course, California is a very striking counterexample to that, going dramatically up. And it's interesting to note that of the two largest markets for renewables in the US, California and Texas, we see dramatically different trends. Even as Texas has overtaken California as the leading source of renewable and storage installation, its retail power prices have continued to trend down, showing the importance of market and regulatory structures beyond the simple energy mix in terms of what consumers actually pay. Now, if you look at this in a global perspective, you'll see that the US is still doing broadly pretty well. If you compare us with Germany or Japan, for example, the US is far, far lower for industrial consumers, those real drivers of employment and economic growth. And Canada is only slightly cheaper than us in our electricity rates. And yet, if you look at a residential picture, it's somewhat different. The US is still towards the bottom of the pack, still relatively cheap, and yet Mexico, China, Canada all have us beat. And what's notable is, as you can see in the industrial space, power prices went up since 2021, but have started to moderate a little bit. In the residential space, we don't see that. We see continued growth through 2023, the latest year for which data are available. Now, what does that mean for the pocketbooks of consumers? We should note that in the really long duration since 1994, on the whole, and in fact since 2008, energy goods and services have fallen as a share of total consumption expenditure, right? They're getting cheaper relative to the rest of the economy, and particularly compared to the sort of spike around 2022, though they haven't quite hit the 2020 trough yet. But if you look at the different sources of energy, those have very different impacts, right? Natural gas and electricity, abundant and relatively cheap, have made up a lower and lower proportion of people's total consumption. Motor fuels, on the other hand, are much higher and peakier, respondent to, captive to, global commodity markets and oil, which are, of course, often held hostage to geopolitics and decisions that are made in capitals, not Washington, D.C. But of course, people aren't just consumers, as many of our politicians will remind us. They are producers, workers with jobs. And the contribution of energy to jobs in the U.S. has continued to grow across pretty much every segment, with motor vehicles being the sort of most represented sector here, and energy efficiency, one that often isn't really considered in a lot of discussions of generation, transmission, the auto industry, is actually the second largest contributor, and again, growing. Whereas fuels, transmission, distribution, and storage, and electric power generation all have significant but lower contributions in these top two sectors. And then within power generating technology, we can see that solar is by far the leader in jobs created or generated, with wind and natural gas close behind, and substantial contributions across the entire energy value chain. Now, with that sort of grade snapshot, we're going to go into a few key trends that sort of overlay that basic data picture. First of all, the energy generating capacity build in the US year by year has continued to change. Since the 2000s and through most of the 2010s, natural gas was a major contributor to new capacity build. Increasingly, renewables, particularly wind and solar, and energy storage have come to dominate new capacity build out. We still have a lot of existing gas capacity on the grid, but generally speaking, renewables and storage are often the cheapest and easiest things to build in most markets, even without subsidies. And as such, they've made more and more of a contribution to meeting our energy growth. And that's reflected in part in corporate energy demands, which are often a leading indicator of energy generation added to the grid. As we can see, that's highly dominated by renewables, primarily solar and secondarily wind. And 2024 was a record year for these corporate energy procurements, one that represents a bounce back from a slight dip in 2023. And that's in gigawatt volume, the actual amount of power getting built, not just in spending. And if you look into the sort of underlying trends that are driving this, we can see two things. One, the big tech companies, Amazon, Meta, Google, Microsoft, that have traditionally driven this market, continue to dominate it. Secondarily, we're seeing a healthy diversification in some of the other companies that sort of drive this, with consumer groups like Walmart and insurance groups like United Health increasingly getting into the sector, along with industrials like Hyundai and Air Product. In fact, the U.S. Department of Defense itself played a major role here. And lastly, there's a diversification of sources. That little purple part at the top on the left and on the right, the other sources, that's nuclear primarily. That shows the growing interest in clean, firm power to keep new industrial load, data centers running reliably, yet with minimal impacts on the rest of the environment. Now, drilling down within some of these technologies, we wanted to note a change in the U.S. energy storage picture. Traditionally, this is really dominated by pumped hydro storage, right? Just storing enough water at hydropower to release as needed. In pure gigawatt terms, basic capacity, we can see that energy storage, primarily lithium-ion batteries, have overtaken traditional pumped hydro as a major source of capacity. However, that's purely in gigawatt terms. The gigawatt hour, for those of you who aren't familiar, is a measure of how many hours you can actually be unleashing those gigawatts. Pumped hydro can often go for about 10 hours. The typical energy storage capacity in most markets is about 4 hours. And so in terms of actual gigawatt hours deployable from those lithium-ion batteries, there's still quite a way to go to catch up with pumped hydro. So ultimately, both are quite important to the increasing resilience and sort of price arbitrage that can keep the grid both cheap and reliable. Now, pivoting a bit from energy generation to energy use, we can see some interesting trends in the electric vehicle market, which continue to grow year over year from 2023 to 2024. Note that Tesla continues to dominate as a critical contributor to the vehicle electrification trend, but it's also diversified into a variety of other brands, both of some of the big three like Ford, but also of international firms increasingly setting up in the US, like BMW, like Toyota, and so forth. And at the very top, there's a wide group of other automakers, more up-and-coming ones that are contributing. So we see a market that is less reliant on Tesla sales. We see a market that is diversifying in terms of automakers, price points, and models. And we ultimately see healthy growth in actual electric vehicle sales year on year. In terms of what's driving the transportation transition, it's of course not just a matter of light transport, which is relatively easy to electrify, but also in terms of providing fuels that can really allow for heavy transport to work differently. And we've seen very healthy growth in the supply of renewable diesel, primarily made from soybeans. Extremely large growth in SAF from 2023 to 2024. That's sustainable aviation fuel, which of course has major applications for jet airliners. And on the demand side, we also see that there's continued healthy growth continued healthy demand for new SAF procurement agreements. You'll note that 2024 is a little bit lower in new agreements than 22 and 23, but that's partly because there are existing agreements already in place for a lot of American airlines, and not just American Airlines itself, but United and other players in the transport sector. Now, this is all about things where markets are looking healthy, diversifying, growing. There's other places where there's room for improvement. And the big one for those who are particularly concerned about the Paris Agreement or emissions of carbon dioxide and equivalent greenhouse gases is that the U.S.'s sort of greenhouse gas emissions reduction has stalled out a little bit. Both overall, there might be a slight increase in total GHG emissions, and in the energy sector specifically, there's a bit of a flattening out year on year in 2024. This represents very different fates across different sectors. If you'll note, power has had its CO2 equivalent emissions decline the steepest. Transportation has declined from its peak, but in the last year or two, it's been relatively flat. And then industrial emissions in green have ticked slightly up, partly reflecting petrochemicals and other sort of key industrial sectors of the U.S. continuing to grow. So we haven't seen as much investment in changing or reducing the energy profile of industrial manufacturing and other sort of load in the U.S., nor have we seen a lot of movement in building or agricultural emissions. So beyond the power sector, there would be a lot more work to do to lower CO2 equivalent emissions. And in particular, within the power sector, you see very different fates based on generating technology, right? We're all aware that a lot of states, particularly in the Mid-Atlantic and Northeast, had very generous and ambitious goals for installing more offshore wind. And yet, as you can see by these relatively empty bars, only a small fraction of most of those capacity purchase goals for offshore wind have really been fulfilled. Beyond New Jersey, New York, Massachusetts, Virginia, and a handful of other states, we see that the ambition really wasn't being met in 2024 with reality. Offshore wind is highly sensitive to prices and to interest rates that were driven up by prices, and in the sort of post-COVID inflation wave and resulting in interest rate hikes from the Fed, those have simply struggled to compete. Solar has been doing considerably better. Onshore wind is okay. Offshore wind, however, has been struggling even before recent policy changes. And in terms of sort of more nascent things, technology sectors beyond the relatively mature clean power generation and electric vehicles, we see a lot more ambition, again, than reality. The blue bar on the left represents announced, that is, intended, hydrogen electrolyzer capacity build out in the US. You'll notice that's measured in gigawatts. If you look really closely at the top on the left, you'll see a tiny purple bar represented on the right. That's the actual operational US electrolyzer capacity, represented in megawatts, a small fraction of that ambition, in part because of the 45V clean hydrogen tax credit being held up effectively for 2 years, in part because of issues with demand. It's taken rather a lot of time to actually get that in gear. And speaking of taking a bit of time, I'm running low on mine, so I'll leave you with 2 or 3 thoughts. There are some things that are simply changing under the hood, neither obviously good nor bad. One, of course, is that we're seeing growing industrial load, not just across regions, but with differentiation within regions. Obviously, this includes data centers, the renewal of manufacturing, and so forth. And you can see that this is really driven by a handful of places, right? If you look within Texas, it's really the far west region and the north, particularly those which are close to the oil and gas fields, where there's a really large growth in electricity. That's because they're electrifying oil and gas extraction. In the right, PJM, we see that energy growth is really being driven by Dominion, aka Data Center Alley. And lastly, just a quick note, renewables are really filling the interconnection queues, the list of projects that are due to connect and increase generation. That is ultimately where we're going to see a lot of the growth moving forward, driven in part by growing demand from data centers and manufacturing, and manufacturing is a major trend, but I think it's best to leave that to Diana. Thank you very much.
Well, that was extremely well done, Derrick. Lots of information, really good primer for everybody about, kind of where are we as we think about energy and environmental policy here in Congress. So I'm really happy to have a very esteemed panel here of different industry experts to give their spin on what they see in the 2025 Factbook trends. So to kick us off, we're going to go to Diana Godlevskaya. She is the Deputy Director for Federal Affairs with the American Clean Power Association. Diana, I will advance your slide when you let me know, and welcome. Thank you for doing this today.
Thanks. Let me get situated with this mic. Amazing. Great. Well, thank you for having me here. My name is Diana, and I'm with the American Clean Power Association. Quick little bit about us. We are a trade association. We have hundreds of member companies representing utility-scale solar, land-based wind, offshore wind, energy storage, transmission, green hydrogen. So we really cover a big swath of the energy technologies that we're talking about today. And I've been in ACP for 3 years. Our member companies span from manufacturers to developers, electric utilities, and so on and so forth from there. So we really encompass the entire supply chain, generation side, distribution, everything in between. We can go to the next slide. I wanted to select this slide. There are so many great slides, especially in the Factbook. And I wanted to select this slide specifically because I really think this is kind of where rubber hits the road. We hear so much about onshoring of supply chains, and this slide really shows that. So since the passage of the IRA, since August of 2022, we have seen over 250, 264 on this slide, but it's been, I'll just say over 250, that number keeps growing, manufacturing plants announced. Those are new plants, expanded plans, new additions to existing plants. And we're really seeing a manufacturing renaissance. At least that's what we call it here at ACP. Over the last 2 decades, we have seen manufacturing decline in the United States, and we've seen that these clean energy tax credits are really driving investments. These manufacturing facilities and plants are going into largely rural red communities. These are communities that are very much looking for investments and new jobs. So clean energy is driving this. But I want to kind of expand from that a little bit, and I don't want to jump too far ahead, but just a couple of thoughts here. Our member companies, those that are investing in the clean energy sector, are looking for business certainty to ensure that we can continue making these investments. We recently released an S&P study showing that demand is going to grow by 50% in the next 15 years. So we're really going to need to build more and more and more. We're going to need more gas. We're going to need more renewables. We're going to need more nuclear. We're going to need all the above technologies. And with that, we are going to continue to see the expansion of onshoring of supply chains. A lot of these investments are going to EVs. A lot of these investments for manufacturing going to solar. So I know there are a lot of Hill conversations happening around onshoring of supply chains. And I think this chart especially shows that that is exactly what's happening. But our member companies are looking to Congress to ensure that there is business certainty. They can keep making these investments. And I will actually leave it there.
Excellent points. Yeah, thank you. Look forward to coming back to you with some follow-up questions. Next, we're going to hear from Charles Hernick. Charles is the head of U.S. Environmental Policy with Amazon. Charles, great to have you, and thanks for your support of the Factbook.
Thank you, Lisa. Thanks to BCSE for putting all the content together, and thank you, Dan, for hosting this great event. It's a pleasure to participate in this again. Again, my name is Charles Hernick. I lead environmental policy for Amazon. We are an online retailer. We are a cloud service provider. We are a grocer. I hope you're familiar with Amazon Studios and looking forward to the new James Bond movie. At Amazon, everything that we do is guided by one obsession. It's customer obsession. And we aim to delight our customers by focusing on innovation in every part of our portfolio. And that includes our commitment to tackle the climate change problem in our own footprint. We have an ambitious goal to be net zero across our operations by 2040. That's 10 years ahead of the Paris Climate Agreement. And we aim to do that through a three-step process, essentially. First is to focus on emissions disclosure. Second, on decarbonization, so that's the real hard work of reducing greenhouse gas emissions. And the last part is to neutralize carbon emissions. That decarbonization step is really important and one where we've had a lot of progress. There was a slide earlier that showed Amazon as a leading corporate purchaser of renewable power. That's not just last year. That's not just the year before that. It's been 5 years in a row that Amazon is the world's largest corporate purchaser of renewable power. What this slide shows here is that interest in renewable power is going to continue to increase. We set a goal to match on an annual basis our energy use with renewables by 2030. Last year we hit that goal 7 years ahead of schedule. So it's just to indicate where we're making our investment. We know that it's not going to be enough, though, and that's why last year in October we also announced an agreement with X Energy, an advanced nuclear energy company. We invested $500 million in X Energy with the goal of bringing forward that advanced nuclear power and helping put that onto the grid and online. So what you see on this slide here is an up arrow, and you need to get the fact book and look at the specific details and break that up to see where it's coming. But notice the up arrow on renewable energy, it's still increasing. So Amazon's focused on bringing more renewable power to the grid. We're also focused on diversifying to nuclear power. The other graph is a little more choppy, and it's just basically a straight line across, right? And that one focuses on carbon credits. And I'm really excited, actually, that this is the first year that the fact book is highlighting carbon credits. This is a market-based mechanism for neutralizing and offsetting emissions. And that's the third part of what Amazon's climate pledge is about. When we look across the market, that flat line is indicative of skepticism in the market, not just by Amazon, but by many other companies. When we look at the voluntary offset market, only about 5% of what's out there meets Amazon's quality bar. That's not a lot. So if you're skeptical and you're critical of the voluntary carbon market, you're not at all alone. For that reason, Amazon has made a multi-year investment and effort to focus on reducing deforestation, focusing on agroforestry, and then focusing on new innovative technologies like direct air capture to be able to legitimize and raise the quality bar and bring more companies into that process. That's why just a couple of weeks ago, we actually announced that Amazon will be selling carbon credits through a service through our Amazon Sustainability Exchange. I'd be happy to talk more about that if there are questions about it, but it's one where we are aiming to create a flywheel effect and bring more companies into the voluntary carbon market, hopefully get that annual offset issuance to increase and grow by focusing on quality and really aiming to provide solutions not just for Amazon, but for many of the companies that we work with. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Charles, and thanks for mentioning that announcement. So really market-making announcement. So look forward to learning more in the coming weeks about that, and of course, take a question if we had one. Next, we're going to hear from James Manser, Vice President of Global Government Relations for Johnson Controls. James, welcome. This is your first time on our Factbook panel, but not for Johnson Controls. So wonderful to have you. Look forward to hearing your comments.
Great. Thank you very much. Thanks for having us, and thanks for putting this very important event together. So I work for Johnson Controls as VP Global Government Relations. You can imagine the various policies that we see around the world and constant change. So it's been very interesting in my first less than a year with JCI. So it's learning a lot. As a company, we were founded in 1885, incorporated in Wisconsin. JCI is a global leader in smart, healthy, sustainable buildings. We offer the world's largest portfolio of building technology. We operate in 150 countries, and we offer HVAC services, industrial refrigeration systems, building efficiency and management controls, security systems, fire detection, fire suppression. So you can imagine all the different areas that energy touches us. We have over 100,000 team members globally, 37,000 here in the U.S., and including several manufacturing sites right here in the United States, and our global R&D facility, which is in New Freedom, Pennsylvania, right near York. Have you ever heard of York Air Conditioning, which was also back in 1933, right here at the Capitol, had the world's largest refrigeration machinery air conditioning install in the world at the time. So, what really stood out to us, the reason why I give you all that excessive detail about what we do at Johnson Controls is just the energy consumption and where it's at and where we can lean in to make a difference. So if you take a look at slide 15, while you might see on the commercial side, that teal area seems pretty consistent over time. When you actually read the bullet points, in the near term, we saw residential consumption decrease by 2.6%, commercial increased by 0.7%. When you extrapolate that back since 2014, residential has decreased 11.6%, but commercial has increased 6.8%. And so when you overlay that with what we understand for commercial energy use, that HVAC can account, depending on what study you're looking at, from 40 to 60%, lighting 20 to 30, and water heating 10 to 15. If you really want to go and move the needle, that's an area to lean into, and that's where we lean into as a company. Not only do we practice that, you can all feel free to download our sustainability report. Hat tip to my friend Mark in the audience here for his work on it, but also the work that we do to support our customers in achieving their goals. Some of them up on this panel here. So, we can get to some of the details of how we move that, but I think that's just a main area. If you take away one thing from my remarks today, it's that, really leaning into that commercial space to make a difference. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much, James. Okay, next, we're going to hear from Jack Thirolf, Head of Energy Policy with Net Power. Welcome, Jack.
Thank you, Lisa, and congrats, and thank you again to the Business Council and for EESI for putting this together. Net Power, we're not as big or as well known as Amazon, for example, today, but we have big ambitions and look forward to future iterations of the Factbook where we can be that large and noteworthy. We are a new type of natural gas turbine. We're headquartered in Durham, North Carolina. The idea is to use natural gas, produce electricity, and inherently capture 97% plus of all the emissions. Natural gas does a lot of good things in the power sector today. A lot of just great partnership with renewables, for example, in terms of helping integrate variable energy resources into the grid, keeping the lights on. Our technology would essentially allow you to do that while effectively eliminating any of the air pollution from the system. We have a test facility outside of Houston in LaPorte that's been operating since 2018, doing different testing on different components for our system. And our intention is to build our first utility scale product, which would be a 250 megawatt facility out in West Texas in the Permian Basin. Our hope would be to bring that online as soon as 2029. And we'll just note it, from the great detail in Derrick's presentation. That's the part of Texas where electricity load growth is especially going up, in large part because of electrification of the oil and gas sector. So that is Net Power. We fit very well within the Business Council's, let's say, triad of efficiency, renewables, and natural gas, where all these technologies are trying to work together to deliver the outcome that the country needs, which is affordable energy and getting as clean as absolutely possible. If we jump, the two slides I'll talk about, one is about natural gas demand in the United States. It shouldn't be a surprise to folks if you're reading headlines and following the sector that demand for natural gas continues to increase. It's an incredible, not a story for today, but maybe another time on just looking from 2010 to today, emissions reductions, and then the change in, let's say, generation share from the power sector, the role that natural gas has played has been incredible. And it's been, things from like mercury air toxic standards, other elements that have been part of the Business Council's work that have been part of that story. But we're seeing here that it's really driven by LNG growth and by growth in the power sector. And the simple answer, which is almost maybe too simple to say, natural gas is abundant. The United States has a lot of natural gas. That's thanks to geology and because of technical know-how and entrepreneurship in the sector. And it's also relatively low cost. That's why we're seeing a huge growth, continued growth in natural gas demand. And our expectation is power sector demand goes up, like we need more electricity. We'll also be needing more natural gas to meet that demand. The limitation that we might see in future versions of the Factbook is not the availability of the gas per se, but the availability of the equipment to convert it into electricity. So shortages, long time delays in getting a turbine to produce electricity. That's really a limiting factor for more natural gas consumption and deployment. And if we go to the next area, which is more directly in our remit, which is carbon capture. So I think we had done another version of this where it's like the areas where we've had great ambitions, but maybe not as much delivery, and hydrogen was in that section, not casting aspersions on hydrogen, but also carbon capture, where the potential is tremendous. The numbers that we're seeing in the Factbook year over year over the past 10 years have not shown tremendous growth. We think that there will be growth and that there is a need for growth. A number of the reasons why this hasn't just worked out is there's still technical challenges for turbines like ours to get proven out, but it really is like the price signals and the market demand. Renewables have grown tremendously, and that's a great thing. We think that these harder emission gets are next up, and that's why you're seeing a renaissance in nuclear, and you're seeing, we think, growth in something like carbon capture. So what we're providing as a clean, firm solution will be that competitor, good competition with the nuclear sector. So our hope is that in future versions of the Factbook, again, we're seeing this dramatic growth go up and all these intended projects getting built because of the policy certainty, because of the customer demand, and because of just the market fundamentals. We need more electricity. We want it clean, and those signals are there to actually drive the investments.
Thank you very much, Jack. Next, we're going to hear from Michael Yancey, Director of Congressional Policy for Citizens for Responsible Energy Solutions. Welcome, Michael. Maybe just talk a little bit about Citizens for Responsible Energy Solutions, too.
Sure.
Since you're a little different than others, but very welcome.
Yeah, thank you, Lisa, and thank you for inviting us to be on the panel today. So, as she said, Michael Yancey, Director of Congressional Policy at the Citizens for Responsible Energy Solutions. We're often called CRES because it's a lot easier to say. We are a right-of-center organization that advocates for clean energy with an all-of-the-above outlook. And with the addendum of, we just did a paper on geothermal, so we like to now say we're for all of the above and below. So our general take is that our goals are that we want to address America's energy needs, our economic needs, and our environmental needs. So that generally means investing deeply in new energy systems so that we can meet the needs of today's economy and tomorrow's economy. To get there, we generally think the best approach is a market-based approach and one that adopts innovative technologies as quickly as possible. To do that, we've got a lot of policy wonks in our team, but the three big policy solutions that we have out there are maintaining the tax incentives, addressing the onerous permitting situation, doing comprehensive permitting reform, and then finally, last but not least, is really providing robust funding for research and development at a federal level. There's a lot of great work going on in the states. There's a lot of great work going on in the market, but I think having the federal government being a catalyst to make sure you have as many carrots and as few sticks as possible to make sure that we can deploy clean energy technology as quickly as possible can really make sure that we address those energy needs while also making sure that America continues to lead in the energy space and the economic space globally. Just if we can move to this slide. So the slide that we cover is so the electric generation mix. And it's basically the exact same. Those two pictures are exactly the same. The first is the electricity generation by fuel type with percentages, and the next is electricity generation by fuel type with with gigawatt hours. So really the key takeaways that I have from this slide is that, number one, the picture on the right, we're generating more energy than ever. And we're going to continue doing so. Energy demand is keep going up domestically and internationally, and we need to put the pedal to the metal and just have every single electron on the grid that we can. Number two is that we're getting more clean energy. So that means more natural gas as compared to coal, more renewables than ever. You're seeing more pilot projects and demonstration projects for geothermal, for carbon capture, all the things that we've talked about, and that's all fantastic, and we need to do more. I would also say that some of the signals that I'm seeing in this chart is that, number one, energy is tied to prosperity. As our GDP goes up, our energy consumption is going to increase. Number two is that the change in the energy system is going to be slow. It is not going to happen overnight, and to do it right and to make sure that we don't have high energy prices or blackouts, it is going to require monumental effort over a long period of time. And finally, something that was addressed in the fact book but is not on this slide, and I don't want to get too complicated about it, but this is just the United States. The U.S. and most developing countries are deploying large amounts of renewables and clean energy technologies, but to really drive down emissions and to meet the world's energy needs, we need really all the above. And here at home, we need to make sure that those energy products that we're exporting are as clean as possible, are as cheap as possible, and address as many needs as possible. Thank you.
Thank you. That was excellent and very well said, and a really good bridge to this next part, where I'm going to popcorn around a little bit and ask each one of you a question, and then maybe close with a group question about what Congress can do, and then I'm going to turn it over to Dan. So we're going to go in about 10 minutes here to cover a few areas of importance. So I'm going to group some of the questions together. Diana, I would love to start with you. Derrick had some slides that talked about energy prices, talked about impact on household spending, but I just wanted to get your perspective. How have new electricity sources affected energy spending for Americans, and how do you anticipate energy spending changing with the uncertainty of tax credits and other federal investments in the energy sector?
Yeah, great question. Thank you. Yeah, I'll work my way backwards here. So there was a recent Brattle Group study that came out maybe a couple of weeks ago that said that eliminating the tax credits would increase residential bills on average by about $83 annually. Now, that number might not sound high, but we all know how high those bills can get, and $83 is a lot of money for a lot of families. We're expecting businesses and corporate groups to get an even higher increase in their bills. But when you talk about the economy more broadly, clean energy tax incentives are driving investment and growing our economy. We are seeing manufacturing facilities open. We're seeing jobs be created. We're seeing the economy grow. And a lot of our members are looking at the instability or uncertainty around these tax credits, and they're thinking, do we continue building? Do we continue making these investments? Do we continue creating these jobs? Are these tax credits going to be in place, a couple of months from now, a year from now? So there's a lot of uncertainty there, and a lot of our members are trying to figure out if they should slow down and kind of see what this uncertainty entails. So when we talk about these tax credits, it's going to hit the pockets of families when their bills increase, but it's also really going to slow the impact on our economy with fewer jobs and fewer manufacturing plant openings. And we'd love to continue seeing that growth.
Thank you, Diana. Let's talk a little bit about this pivot moment that we're in. There's a lot of conversation about load growth. And, Charles, maybe I'll start with you. What does the opportunity of load growth mean for updating, modernizing, and expanding our energy system?
Yeah, thanks, Lisa. Great question. In simple terms, and to pick up where I started in the first place, is it's our opportunity to fast track innovation and to really pull forward innovative new technologies. Cloud computing, there's two elements to cloud computing that I can think of. One is just compute efficiency. Moving more data into the cloud will increase compute efficiency. A specific example, if you've got a pen and paper, write down Amazon Sustainability Exchange and then Google it later or check it out on your phone. Maybe not right now because we're still presenting. But what we've done in partnership with a couple of federal agencies is move government data from servers on the ground in DC to the cloud, where people are able to utilize the data and conduct analyses much faster than they could by having to access data sets one at a time. And so if you've ever had to crunch numbers, you know how cumbersome that can be. And that's one major opportunity for efficiency, just bringing forward that kind of innovation. The real, in terms of actually taking advantage of increased demand, especially for Amazon, is in the transportation sector. I hope that you've seen some of our electric Rivian delivery trucks in the area. They're quieter. People like to see them coming down the road. They've got innovative technologies that actually help the driver find packages a lot quicker. So we're able to pull forward innovation, but it requires enough electricity and enough interconnections for us to be able to charge those vehicles. And also when it comes to other types of transportation fuels, electrofuels, clean fuels ultimately depend on clean energy inputs to be able to drive that innovation. And so that's going to be a constraint or a real opportunity that we see as a result of increased growth across the board.
Thanks, Charles. So, Jack and James, I'm going to go to you next, maybe drilling down a little bit more on this conversation about demand growth. I don't know if it was you, Jack, or somebody else who mentioned the term clean firm, right? Can you talk about what that is, and what does that mean for the energy sector, and how does carbon capture and storage fit into that conversation of clean firm?
Sure. Thank you, Lisa. Yeah, clean firm was one of the terms that really came out and was dominant in the news in 2024. You're seeing older nuclear plants come back online in a way that I don't think any of us, maybe someone was super smart and foresaw that 5 or 10 years ago, but really a big surprise. And it's driven by an increase in demand that, again, was not generally contemplated from the industry broadly, right? We haven't seen load growth like this since the 60s, since the 70s. A lot of our regulatory structures have been built since then to try to slow down the build out of electric infrastructure. You don't want stranded assets. We now need to learn how to build stuff again, not just from a technical perspective, but also from a regulatory perspective. Clean firm is also driven by customer demand, where people want firm, reliable power. They also want it to be clean, and they're willing to pay for that. They have their sustainability reports. They have their customer demands. We're seeing this from residential customers. There's real leadership from the offtake community, as there has been, to help stand up wind, solar, and storage deals. But we're seeing that broaden out and diversify into nuclear. Our hope is that we're included in that group as well. But part of it is like, well, yeah, what does it mean to be clean? And that is an opportunity and maybe a challenge for, let's say, natural gas with CCS, having our eyes open. We need to show our environmental story really clearly and really well. And we need to win local community acceptance as well. Those are the limiting factors for deployment. Again, not just for us, but I think for the electric sector broadly. If we don't win that community support locally, we can have a great global story, but those projects won't get built. So clean firm is power that is running close to 24/7, 365, that has ultra low emissions or like a minimized environmental input or output, and that can support, let's say, 24/7 clean or zero emission goals from an array of stakeholders that may be large tech companies and may also be utilities. That's what's helping drive this opportunity for companies like ours and also folks in the nuclear and geothermal sectors.
Yeah, great. James, it's maybe a little two-parter here, but the first is, how does consumption fit into this conversation from your perspective? And then, maybe thinking about one thing we haven't really talked about here. Obviously, this Congress and the Trump administration and a lot of our industries are really focused on moving more quickly, and we're going to talk about permitting reform after. But from a regulatory perspective, if we're moving to a less intensive regulatory environment, we're going to try to open things up. How is the private sector going to respond? Like, how are we going to move forward with our goals in that environment?
No, that's a great question. Thank you. Yeah, it's interesting because I think when you look at it and all the focus that's been on having the latest technologies, not only from an environmental sustainability perspective, but also an efficiency perspective, to try to just, assume that industry may change what they've already been sinking all that R&D into, it's like trying to turn around the aircraft carrier. I don't see that happening. I also don't necessarily see, given the fact that there's such a demand out there that we're seeing, as you mentioned, various nuclear facilities, 3 Mile Island in Pennsylvania coming back online to meet the demand, that I don't see us shying away from new technologies that, from an environmental perspective and an efficiency perspective, are going to deliver those savings. So, I don't see a long-term impact on that. And also, when you look at what our friends in the EU have been doing and kind of leading on some of these standards, I don't see global companies that have made that R&D investment shying away from it for what may be, a limited market, in the U.S. So I still see that efficiency need and meeting some of the global standards. And let's also not forget that states sometimes go above and beyond what standards are out there too. So, I think as you may see certain states, or perhaps even at the federal level, some changes from a regulatory policy, you may see the opposite in other states. So, I don't necessarily see a shying away from that. And the one thing, and this is not an April Fool's joke, that we can also see as far as energy utilization is that both the Biden administration and Trump administration, both in the first quarter of this year, at the end of the Biden administration, beginning of Trump, had executive orders related to AI and having the U.S. be a leader in that. So as we all know, the increased energy consumption that comes along, dovetailing with AI is another area that I think, just as we look at things from an efficiency perspective, we deal with it in one of two ways, right? We either increase generation or we reduce demand. And so I think to meet those needs, we're going to probably have to do both and lean into the technology.
Right, and one of the things we're exploring around our leadership table is the sequencing and the speed. And that's why the demand side actions really need to be looked at in equal weight to whatever we're doing on supply, because those might be this next wave of early harvest as we expand and we take advantage of this moment we have. I mean, this really is a global competitive race we're in across many technologies, and we don't want to lose our innovative edge. Right. So I'm going to go to Mike, because we talked about how do we do things faster, and what's the role of the federal government to help us make the regulatory burden less so that we can move forward with our goals. So maybe talk a little bit about permitting reform or other federal initiatives that you're focused on at CREZ that would help us do that.
Sure. And I think that's the name of the game right now for all energy, is just how do you deploy it as quickly as possible. When it comes to permitting reform, I think there seems to be strong support for certain individual actions, but what really needs to happen is comprehensive permitting reform to make sure that the various energy technologies are treated equally when they're trying to get their siting done, when they're going through their permitting process. Without that, you can nickel and dime like this particular permit for this particular transmission line or this particular permit for this type of generating station, but without the whole thing, I think you're going to have parts of the overall system that slow the entire thing down. You're kind of seeing that right now with natural gas, and this is not necessarily permitting, but the ability of, as Jack was mentioning earlier, the ability of natural gas electricity to be produced is being really thwarted by the ability to get generators up and operational. And so that's mostly on the manufacturing side of things, but without that permitting reform, you're not going to have those new manufacturing facilities. Without permitting reform, you're not going to get transmission rollout as quickly as possible, whether that's to new residential facilities or to the oil patch that desperately needs electricity. On the regulatory side, I think there's a lot of things there, but just off the top of my head, I think the most important thing is just when you already have a facility in the ground, updating the regulations so that it's much easier to upgrade those facilities so that they already have lower emissions and not necessarily jumping through years and years of hoops to go to the next level of lower emissions technologies. Just mostly thinking about emissions, but if you can reduce emissions today, you should be able to reduce emissions today without going through all of those hurdles, as long as you can prove it.
Right. I think, people look at this question from a lot of angles. I mean, number one, I think from all of us, you're hearing that this is an imperative. We don't have a choice. We need to do this to remain competitive around the world in many markets. And from a geopolitical perspective, it's important. But a lot of these market rules and regulations were written decades ago. And I think we all forget that sometimes. So it's a natural opportunity to review and improve and modernize these rules. So across the federal government, there are many opportunities for streamlining, for modernization, and we should welcome that conversation and know that we can do it, especially in the United States, in an environmentally responsible way, because we have that strong foundation. So I think that's definitely a big change in the last several years, how that conversation is evolving. So I'm going to turn it to Dan. So if anyone in the audience has questions, he's going to invite you or online audience to do that. But first, I'm just going to very quickly, kind of rapid fire here, go around. If there were one or two things that Congress could do that would make your ambitions easier, what would they be? And I think I'm going to start with Jack. And then maybe we'll go to Mike and go work our way back. Yeah.
For us, a really simple, maintain and enhance 45Q, which is the credit for carbon capture. There's legislation introduced to enhance the credit already, and we're appreciative of that. And then agree, permitting reform, which has a legislative component. It's also like a broad cultural, right? It's just like our society needs to embrace building stuff again, and doing it in a way that is like additive to society. So there's an element on companies as well to do better, to earn that trust and to get things built. Sorry, that's not something Congress could do, and an extra point. But
right. Well, members of Congress are like the face of a lot of this for their constituents. So, okay, Mike.
Kind of what I said earlier in my introduction. Number one, keeping the current tax credits. There's a lot of things on the table right now. CREZ is very strongly supportive of specifically the carbon capture tax credit, 45Q, the nuclear tax credits, 45Q, 45U, 45X for clean manufacturing, the tech neutral investment and production tax credits for electricity, and there's one more and it's slipping my mind right now, but 45V for hydrogen. So I think those tax credits are really important, getting comprehensive permitting done as quickly as possible, make sure we can build things, and then continuing funding research and development so that America continues to lead in the innovation space as well.
Thank you. James.
I would say from a tax perspective, just to add on to that, probably 179D from a design perspective. I think having that credit helps those that are doing more ambitious projects kind of lean in that regard, as well as ITC credits. But I think even more broadly, to take a step back, when you look at the industrial manufacturing base that we're trying to bolster here in the U.S., just to realize that a lot of these credits actually pay for themselves over with the economic activity, and to also, from a high-level perspective, just ensure that there's predictability. I think, regardless what Congress does, just to make sure that it's from a long-term perspective, so that business has the ability to tool, gear up, hire the right people, and then drive towards those objectives. So I think predictability is probably the overarching theme from our perspective.
Yeah, excellent. I just want to call it out because it hasn't come up before. The 179D credit you mentioned, that's for commercial buildings, right? Okay, just want to make sure. Charles.
Yeah, thanks, Lisa. I want to pull up one thing that Michael, said in terms of comprehensive permitting reform, and every member's kind of got their own priority, and every administration, for as far back as I can remember, has had an executive order and an effort on permitting reform, and that's good. It all needs to add up. And one specific example I'll give relates to advanced nuclear, and I mentioned Amazon's investment in X Energy, and it's exciting. $500 million is a lot of money. It means that they can hire and they can work through the permitting process, and that's the kind of difficult part. I talked to the folks over there, and they're looking at delivery and turning on their generators in 2030. I'm like, well, can you do it a little sooner than that? And it's not an engineering limitation. It is a bureaucracy and permitting application safety demonstration process. And we need to make sure that these new technologies work and that they are safe and that they are actually improving, reducing emissions and improving environmental benefits and delivering the jobs that communities expect. But we do need to do it much faster.
Thank you. So, Diana, closing us out here, what can Congress do from ACP's perspective?
Yeah, thanks, Lisa. I want to echo everything my colleagues have said so far. Ensuring business certainty by protecting the tax credits, especially tech neutral. And again, ensuring that businesses have certainty going forward. They know that every couple of years we're not just going to swing back and forth because these are multi-decade long investments. So that's part one, number one priority for us. Number two priority is permitting reform and transmission. It is just taking so incredibly long to build. Transmission lines are taking 10 to 15 years to permit. It is insane. And especially since I talked about there's going to be a 50% increase in demand in the next 15 years, we need to build a lot quicker and we need to permit a lot quicker. And I'm hopeful because there has been a lot of bipartisan support in this space. So I think we can get there. We just need to get there.
Terrific. Well, thanks, everybody. I'm going to leave the stage now, but I'm going to turn it to Dan Brissett. Dan?
You can stay up there, Lisa. I can move around
okay.
with the microphone. And that way
We've got a roving mic here for the fearless leader. Go ahead.
So the live can pick it up.
Thank you. My name's Ann Vroom. This has been extremely interesting. Recently, I've heard Secretary Burgum talk about the White House's National Energy Governance Council. And I'm wondering if any of you all have had any interaction with that initiative, whether that can be used as a platform for finally great increasing these regulatory log jams that we've been hearing about since at least 2020 permitting reform studies were commissioned, permitting reform councils or advisory councils were. I mean, where is all that? Because we keep hearing about it year after year.
Anyone on the panel? Okay, Diana, go first, and then anyone else who wants to chime in. I see Mike at the end.
Yeah, I'm so sorry I can't see him behind the podium. But I want to just quickly say that we at ACP are working with the Trump administration. We are very excited about Trump's agenda to unleash American energy. We very much see our technology as a part of that. I think a lot of folks, especially at DOE and DOI, are just now staffing up. So we're giving them a little bit of breathing room before we really hammer it in. But we're absolutely in those offices making sure that they're aware that we are a key part of the unleashing America's energy agenda. And we're excited about the path forward.
Great, thank you. Mike?
So I do think that there is a real opportunity here at the National Energy Dominant Council. I think having Secretary Burgum lead that as a cabinet secretary is really critical. There's a lot of things you can do with executive rulemaking and executive action to make sure that permitting is done. But unless Congress actually acts on it, it's not going to be permanent. Not to mention, there have been a number of recent court cases that kind of, I don't necessarily want to say throws a wrench into everything, but like it raises a lot of questions in terms of what can be done and stands by legal scrutiny. For instance, the overturning of Chevron doctrine, that is going to lead to a lot of interesting questions legally. There was another one that essentially said that CEQ needs to rein in a lot of its authority, so I'm very curious how that plays out, and that's not something like the administration can work with that, but I don't think that's actually going to be solidly in place until either Congress acts or it goes through the courts in some fashion in the future.
Other questions from the audience? Oh, we've got one in the back. Wait for the mic and I'll be right with you. There you go.
First, thank you for taking your time to speak to all of us. Basically, my question is, so with all the focus on permitting reform, I just want to ask the question, and it can be a simple yes or no, but is it necessarily that reform is necessary, or is it just that the agencies responsible for processing the permits are either understaffed or underfunded to then process them?
You want to go first? Well, I'll just start. I think it's a little bit of both. If you see, Diana referred to the strong bipartisan efforts in the last Congress to work on variations of different policies related to federal permitting reform. You see a mix of many things, right? And ultimately, they weren't able to come to final agreement at the end of the year, but that was a really positive sign and a very strong foundation for this Congress. So I would say when you look at the package that was last discussed in December, and then you look at what Congressman Westerman was working on here in the House in particular, you start to see this comprehensive look at what Congress can do to improve things. So I think it's a mix of all of those things coming together. Anyone want to chime in? Diana?
Yeah, I'll just add to that. Part of it is absolutely ensuring that agencies are staffed appropriately and adequately, but also, ensuring that agencies are talking to each other, figuring out who the lead agency is, establishing clear timelines for permits, and also establishing clear timelines for something like judicial review to ensure that these projects aren't held up in court indefinitely. That has been one of the key points within permitting reform.
Good question. Thank you.
Thanks for your question. Other questions from the audience? I don't think we've gotten any. Oh, we have got one up here in the second row. Our usual suspects.
I think this is a question for Derrick. I'm not sure. It might or might not be. Anyway, we've had some interesting news come out of China lately. One is that they figured out apparently how to massively enhance the efficiency of AI development by something in excess of 90%. Second is that they have, BYD just announced that they can do ultra-fast charging in 5 minutes for an EV. I'm wondering to what extent you think those things will either net increase or net decrease demand for electricity, especially if we manage to get 5-minute charging in EVs in this country.
I think that's an excellent question. Obviously, for those who haven't heard this term, she's talking about Jevons paradox, the idea that when you make something cheaper and more efficient, you find more uses for it, and so you use more of the inputs overall. And I think there's a few different considerations here, right? That depends on the demand signal that is met by that greater efficiency, right? So the more that companies like Amazon or institutions of the U.S. government find applications for AI, the more that the efficiency of AI unlocks those applications, the more we might see power demand go up on that. I'm going to note that BNEF has a research note on our AI power demand projections coming out in the next few weeks. So there's a wide range of projections across organizations. We'll have our own, and we can talk about that moving forward. But I don't want to jump the gun on that one. As for the electric vehicle question, I think, as you pointed out, it's a matter of technology transfer, first of all. It would also be a matter of the sort of economics of building out both the manufacturing of those kinds of batteries and the installation of those kinds of chargers. And so that would require a sort of comprehensive planning and funding effort that includes the private sector, includes federal and state governments, and that is all adapted to common standards that consumers can adopt fairly easily. I would also note that in the case of electric vehicles in particular, it depends on what form of energy consumption you're looking at. Primary energy consumption would go down with a switch from gasoline to electricity, no matter what fuel source the electricity is generated with. But also, you have to think about the amount of vehicle miles traveled and a bunch of other factors that aren't easy to game out at this stage. And I yield the floor to my fellow panelists if they want to add to that.
Anyone want to add? Charles?
I'll just add a for example. I think that energy constraints are in the immediate view, right? Clean energy constraints are also in the immediate view. For Amazon to be able to continue to reduce our greenhouse gas emissions and purchase renewables, we need more to come on the grid, right? But even when we look at direct air capture, I mentioned that briefly as a type of technology that we're utilizing to neutralize emissions and that we hope can be marketable through the use of carbon credits in the future. Direct air capture, and Jack, I don't know if you can speak to this also, but like it depends on whether it be a natural gas or a cleaner fuel input that drives the overall footprint that's associated with that innovative technology, whether it be carbon capture or direct air capture. So for many of the new clean transportation technologies for direct air capture, we are still going to need abundant energy, but it also will need to be clean. And so at least when I look across the map, like there may be a lot of opportunities for efficiency, and there certainly are. But when I look across the whole portfolio of different types of modes of transportation, whether it be air, whether it be ground, whether it be direct air capture, and other technologies, the need for energy and the need for clean energy is not in short. It's going to be in short supply.
Final question. I think we probably have time for at least one more. You look like you're just. Thank you.
Actually, I think I have more of a request for you all than a question to close things off. Seems like you all are all working together and have an agreement that we need staffing up on the agency front to move forward the permitting process, speed up the permitting process. So I ask that as you all speak to members of Congress and speak to the administration, really show them how important that these federal working jobs are for in terms of permitting, in terms of growing business, in terms of expediting energy dominance in the United States, and the role that things like or agencies like the Department of Energy play in doing that. I think that's all I got.
Well, thanks for that. We wholeheartedly agree, and we will take your advice to make that louder in our advocacy. And I'll just take a moment, since Ruth McCormick wasn't here when we started, to just recognize Ruth McCormick. She's sitting right behind the gentleman who just asked the question. She's our Vice President of Federal and State Affairs. So you may be hearing from her if you haven't already. And thanks for all the work that she does to lead our work here on Capitol Hill. I'll turn it over to Dan.
Thank you, Lisa. Thanks. That was a really great conversation. The best part about not being on a panel is that I get to listen to everything and look at all the very nice slides. But seriously, if you haven't yet taken an opportunity to check out the Factbook, you really ought to. The Factbook's been around for a long time. It's not trying to predict the future, right? It's about describing the trends, and it's amazing. It's a very, very easy way to very quickly get up to speed and answer some questions. Lisa, what percentage of the Factbook slides were presented today? Is this 25% of the slides, 10% of the slides? Maybe a third? So if you like this, and you're hungry for 2/3 more, I'd also like to, we were just talking, you had the question about the BYD and the AI efficiencies. Both of those I was thinking about this when I was listening to you speak. Both of those were at least reported in the news as surprises. I feel like that AI efficiency story made people go, wait, what? And the charging story from BYD was like, wait, what? How is that possible? And I think that's a great reminder that we can say we want to be dominant, but ultimately we've got to keep our eyes on the prize. We can't will dominance, so to speak, into existence. We actually have to do the work. We have to have the policy infrastructure. We have to have the people at the agencies. And we have to have the institution of Congress engaged to ensure that this stuff actually flows through and reaches the people and the companies and the industries and everyone that it was intended to benefit. As I wrap up, just wanted to point out that Charles and Lisa, the only two repeat offenders on this panel today. Lisa, you're a very frequent guest on our panels, and Charles, you are no stranger to EESI. But thanks to Derrick and Diana and James and Jack and Michael for, I think, doing this for your first time. So we'll definitely look forward to opportunities to have you all back. Big thanks to Lisa and the Business Council for Sustainable Energy. I'm glad you pointed out, Ruth, I noticed you in the audience too, but also Laura and Lizzie and Emmy and the whole BCSE team, and of course all of the members of the Business Council that make all of this possible. Thanks again to Derrick and BloombergNEF for once again helping to provide this tremendous resource. We wouldn't be in this room today without our friends in Representative Tonko's office, so big thanks to him for helping with that. And the House and Senate Renewable Energy Efficiency Caucuses and the Sustainable Energy and Environment Coalition for being honorary co-sponsors of our day here today. All of the caucuses are doing great work, and we're really looking forward. If you visit www.esi.org, you can actually already learn more about our upcoming expo, which we host in partnership with the House and Senate Renewable Energy and Energy Efficiency Caucus. I want to say it's July 24th, and so we'll be exploring a lot of these topics in greater detail. Everyone should plan to be here for that. We'll actually be in this room and in the Rayburn foyer. Thanks to everyone on Team EESI. Thanks to Dan O, to Amory, to Allison, to Hannah, to Anna, Molly, and Nicole for all of the hard work that went into bringing this briefing to you all in the audience today, but also to our robust online audience. We also have 3 wonderful spring interns, Hadley, Reneem, and Whitney, who help us a great deal. So thank you very much. Reneem, excellent timekeeping today. And Hadley, you looked busy the entire day. I'm going to assume you were just doing a great job, probably on social media today. Yeah, great. And of course, our videographer, Brendan, is with us today. So thanks, Brendan, for helping us get the briefing out to everyone. Our next briefing at EESI will be next week. God, how is next week April 10th? Anyway, that should be the April Fool's joke. And our briefing title is going to be Towards Healthier Outcomes in Surface Transportation. We're going to be bringing that briefing together with our friends at the Transportation for America and also the American Public Health Association. There's going to be a lot more about transportation and surface transportation specifically, so stay tuned for that. And if you aren't already subscribing to our biweekly newsletter, Climate Change Solutions, I don't know what to say. You really just need to get on that. And it's a great way to keep up with everything briefings, but also our articles, our podcasts, our issue briefs, and our fact sheets, all of the great stuff that we do at EESI. Once again, on the screen is a link to our survey. If you have 2 moments to share with us what you thought of our event today, if you're in our live cast audience and you had any issues with the audio or video, if you have questions or ideas for future topics, please let us know. We read every response. It means a lot. So, Lisa, thanks again. Panelists, thanks again for being here today. Team EESI, thanks again. Hope everyone has a great rest of your April Fool's Day. That's no joke. Hope you have a great April Fool's Day. And we'll see you again next week for Towards Healthier Outcomes in Surface Transportation. Thanks.